teacher gave my daughter a 50% on a math test where she got 23 out of 25 answers right. Let me say that again. 23 out of 25. The math was correct. The work was shown. Every calculation she did right. And she still walked home that afternoon holding a paper that said 50% at the top, circled in red ink, not because she was wrong, because she solved the problems differently than her teacher wanted her to. That's it. That's the entire reason. The answers were right. The grade was wrong. And this teacher, this woman who stood in front of a room full of 9-year-olds and told them that math was about understanding numbers, had decided that being correct wasn't enough. That being correct the right way was what counted. By the time this story ends, that 50% had been changed to a 92. The teacher had been called into the principal's office, and my daughter, my 4th grade daughter who had spent months dreading math homework, finally got to hear someone in a position of authority say the words she deserved to hear. You did it right. You earned this grade. But we didn't get there easily. There were tears at the kitchen table. There were conversations that went nowhere. There was a teacher who looked me in the eye and told me that if my daughter used an unauthorized method on the next test, she would receive a 0. Not a deduction. A 0 for correct answers. My wife thinks I went too far. She says I made it bigger than it needed to be. But she wasn't the one watching our daughter count right answers that had been marked wrong. Let me take you back to where this started. My daughter has always been the kind of kid who gives everything she has. She's bright, she's persistent, and she doesn't quit easily. She has never been the child who throws her backpack down and announces she's not doing homework. If anything, she overinvests. She'll sit at the table long after she should have given up for the night, erasing and rewriting, trying again and again, because she genuinely wants to get it right. So when math started becoming a real problem in 4th grade, not a small bump in the road, but a wall she kept hitting over and over, it was hard for everyone in the house to watch. The subject that was tripping her up was multiplication and division. And in 4th grade, those topics arrive fast and build on each other relentlessly. You go from single-digit multiplication to multi-digit problems in what feels like no time at all. And if the foundation isn't fully there, everything that follows starts to wobble. Now, the school had a tutoring program. We used it. We sat at the kitchen table with her for hours, going over the same problem types again and again. Her teacher was not uncaring, she was trying. But none of it was breaking through in the way we needed it to. My daughter would understand something in the moment, seem to follow the steps, get it right once, and then the next day it would be gone again. She wasn't behind because she wasn't trying. She was behind because the way the material was being taught simply wasn't sticking for her. And I want you to understand that before anything else, because what comes later in this story isn't about a parent refusing to accept that his kid needs help. It's about a parent who found something that helped and then watched a teacher punish his daughter for it. Let me give you a concrete picture of what I mean when I say the method wasn't working. The school was teaching what's sometimes called the area model or the box method. For something like 34 times 27, here's what you do. You break 34 into 30 and 4. You break 27 into 20 and 7. You draw a grid, a 2x2 box. You multiply 30 by 20 and write the result in one box. 30 by 7 in another. 4 by 20 in another. 4 by 7 in the last. Then you add all 4 results together to get your final answer. On paper, as a concept, this method is actually elegant. It's designed to make the structure of multiplication visible, to show kids that 34 times 27 is really 4 separate multiplications that combine. For students with strong number sense, it clicks fast and becomes a powerful tool. For my daughter, it was a 4-step invitation to get lost. Every transition between steps was a new chance to drop a number, miscalculate a partial product, or add the boxes up incorrectly. She was already shaky on her foundational multiplication facts, and this method required her to execute 4 separate multiplication operations before she even started putting the answer together. The more steps, the more places she could go wrong, and she was going wrong about 80% of the time. The traditional method I grew up with works differently. You line up the numbers, you multiply column by column, you carry your digits when necessary. You work through it sequentially, one step following the next. It's procedural, it's predictable, and for a child who needs structure, who does better when each step clearly leads to the next, that predictability can be the difference between sinking and swimming. One afternoon, I sat down with her and walked her through it. I wasn't trying to undermine the curriculum. I was trying to keep my kid afloat. Clicked. That same evening, she worked through a full page of multi-digit multiplication problems. the kind that had been defeating her for months, and she got them right. Not all of them, but most of them. And more importantly, she knew when she'd made a mistake. She could catch herself. She could go back, retrace the step, and fix it. That is a completely different experience from staring at a box method grid and having no idea which part of the process had gone sideways. In the weeks that followed, the homework sessions changed. The crying stopped, or mostly stopped. She's still 9, and math is still math. But the dread evaporated. She started finishing her assignments in a reasonable amount of time. She started getting more problems right than wrong. She started feeling like someone who could actually do this. I want to stop here and make sure you feel the weight of that, because it's easy to move past it. We're talking about a child who had spent months associating math with failure, who sat at that table every single night doing her absolute honest best and walking away feeling like she wasn't smart enough. And now, finally, she had a method that worked for her brain, and she was proving it to herself problem by problem. I thought we had turned a corner. I thought the hard part was behind us. The teacher had assigned a math test for the end of the week, and for the first time all year, my daughter wasn't dreading it. She was ready. She sat down on test day, used the method she had practiced, showed every step of her work, and turned in her paper with the kind of quiet confidence that parents live for. You already know what came back. She came home quiet. That's how I knew something was wrong. My daughter is normally a talker. She fills entire car rides with commentary, what happened at lunch, what her best friend said, a detailed breakdown of some drama that unfolded on the playground. But that afternoon, she climbed into the backseat and looked out the window and said almost nothing the whole drive home. I gave her space until we got inside. Then she put her backpack down and pulled out the test, and she handed it to me without saying a word. I looked at the score first, 50%, a red circle right at the top of the page, and then I looked at the problems. I went through them one by one. She had used the traditional method I taught her, the columns, the carries, all of it, and she had shown every single step. The work was there, the logic was visible, and the answers were right, 23 of 25 correct. I counted once. I counted again. I pulled out my phone and checked her work against a calculator. 23 right answers and a 50% score. 2 problems she had genuinely gotten wrong, those I understood completely. Mark them down. That's fair. That's what tests are for. But the other 23? She had shown her work. She had arrived at the correct answer, and the teacher had marked every single one of them wrong. The grade she earned was a 92. The grade she received was a 50. My daughter sat across from me at that table, and I could see it on her face. She thought she had failed. She thought she just wasn't good at math. She had no idea that she hadn't failed at all. She had been failed. There's a difference, and I was going to make sure someone understood that. I called the school the next morning and asked to speak with the teacher. I want to be precise about where my head was going into that conversation. I was not in attack mode. I was not loaded and ready to fire. I have been on the receiving end of irate parents before in my life, and I have watched those conversations go nowhere because the person asking the question has already decided they know the answer. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to understand what had happened. I genuinely hoped there was a misunderstanding, a scanning error, a misread, something mechanical and fixable. So I told the teacher what I had found. I told her that I had gone through the test problem by problem and that 23 answers appeared to be correct, and that I was confused about how the grade came out to 50%. And she explained it to me. Calmly, clearly, with the tone of someone who had explained this to unreasonable parents before and expected me to eventually come around. She said students were required to use the method taught in class. The box method, the area model, and because my daughter had not used that method, the answers, correct or not, could not receive full credit. I asked her to point me to where the test said that, where, specifically, it stated that a particular method was required. She told me the instructions said to show your work. I said my daughter had shown her work. In full, every step was there. She said that wasn't what she meant by showing your work. I asked what she meant then, because I had always understood showing your work to mean demonstrating the steps that led to your answer, which my daughter had done. She said the assignment was to demonstrate mastery of the method being taught, not just to find the right answer. And then she told me, if this happens again on the next test, the grade will be a 0. A 0? Let me make sure we all understand what that means. My daughter, a 9-year-old who had spent months struggling, who had finally found a method that worked, who had sat down on test day and correctly solved 23 out of 25 problems, was now being told that the next time she did the math correctly and got the right answer, she would receive a 0. Because she used the wrong method. Not an incorrect method. Not a method with mathematical errors. A method that works. A method that has been taught in classrooms for generations. A method that is, by every mathematical standard, completely valid. And the grade for using it successfully would be a 0. Now, I want to ask you something directly. Can you think of any educational philosophy, any pedagogical framework, any coherent theory of how children learn that justifies giving a student a 0 for getting the right answer? I'll wait, because I spent the rest of that day asking myself the same question, and I kept coming back to the same answer. There isn't one. What I was hearing was not about education. It was about control. It was about a teacher who had decided that her authority over how students solved problems was more important than whether they could actually solve them. And rather than ask herself why a student was succeeding with a different method, rather than treat that as useful information about how this particular child learns, she had decided the correct response was a threat. My wife told me to let it go. She said the teacher had 30 kids to manage. She said this wasn't worth the friction. She said I should pick my battles. She's a thoughtful, patient person, and she was probably right that this could have been dropped. But I kept seeing my daughter's face when she handed me that test. Quiet, deflated, convinced she had failed at something she had actually done right. I could not let that stand. I made an appointment with the principal. I want to be honest with you about the internal conversation I was having with myself at that point. Was this a hill worth dying on? Was I really about to march into an elementary school principal's office over a 4th grade math test? My wife thought I was overreacting. The rational part of my brain kept running the practical math of it. My daughter still has to sit in that classroom every day. The teacher is going to know. Whatever goodwill exists between us is going to take a hit. Is the principle of the thing worth that friction? And then I thought about what it looks like to my daughter if I don't. She's 9 years old. She is in the earliest stages of forming her understanding of how the world works, how authority works, how fairness works, what happens when the rules are applied unfairly. If I walk away from this, she learns something. She learns that when a system gets it wrong, you absorb the loss and move on. That correct is only correct if the person in charge says it is. That being right isn't enough if the right person doesn't agree with your method. I refused to teach her that, so I walked in. I had the test. I had my notes. I had the actual written instructions from the test itself. I was calm. I was organized. I was not there to be difficult. I was there to ask a simple question. My daughter correctly answered 23 out of 25 problems and received a 50%. I would like to understand how that outcome is consistent with the instructions printed at the top of the test. And remember what that teacher said would happen if my daughter used a different method again. She was about to find out what happens when a parent decides a 50% for 23 right answers is worth a conversation with someone who has actual authority. The principal called the teacher in. I want you to picture that room. The principal's office, mid-morning. The ordinary sounds of a school day carrying through the closed door, PA announcements, distant voices, the soft percussion of the building going about its business around us. And in that room, a teacher sitting across from a parent who had read the test instructions 3 times, who had counted every correct answer twice, and who was thoroughly done being told that right answers don't count if they were arrived at incorrectly. The teacher restated her position first. Students are required to demonstrate mastery of the method taught in class. Without that demonstration, the test is incomplete. The answers alone are not sufficient. I asked the principal to look at the test, to read the instructions at the top of the page. Out loud, he read them. Show your work. That was it. Not use the box method. Not use the method demonstrated in class. Not demonstrate mastery of a specific procedure. Show your work, and my daughter had shown her work. Every step was there. The work was shown. The answer was correct. The principal turned to the teacher and asked whether the test instructions specified a required method. There was a pause. She said it was implied. He asked where it was implied. In writing. On the test she had handed to the students. Another pause, and that was the moment. The principal told her the grade needed to be changed. He said, directly, without ambiguity, that students could not be penalized for using an alternative valid method, provided they showed their work and arrived at the correct answer. He said the written instructions were the instructions. Implied requirements that existed in a teacher's head and nowhere else were not enforceable. The teacher was not happy. I could see it in everything about her. She was furious in that controlled, professional way, the way that people are furious when they know they've lost an argument they still believe they won. but the grade was changed. That afternoon, the official record reflected what the math had always reflected: a 92%. That evening, I sat down with my daughter and showed her the updated grade. I kept it simple. I told her what had happened, not in the political terms, not with the full drama of the principal's office, just in the terms a 9-year-old can hold. I told her that she had done her math correctly, that her answers were right, and that the grade on the test now reflected that. She looked at the paper for a long moment. Then she looked up at me and said, "So I actually passed?" "Yes, sweetheart, you more than passed. Now, I want to address something before we go any further, because this story didn't end without some complexity. My wife and I had more than one honest conversation about whether I had been right to push as hard as I did, and she made real points. Teachers carry an enormous weight, 30 students, a range of learning styles, a curriculum they didn't design, administrative pressure coming from every direction. The box method exists for a reason. There is genuine pedagogical value in teaching children conceptual frameworks rather than just rote procedures. Kids who understand the why behind the math will be better mathematicians in the long run. I heard all of that. I believed most of it. But here is where I landed, and where I will always land on this. There is a difference between a teacher doing her absolute best under difficult circumstances and a teacher threatening a child with a 0 for arriving at the correct answer via an unauthorized route. One of those situations calls for patience, understanding, and grace. The other calls for someone to say, out loud, that what is happening is not okay. My daughter was not punished because she couldn't do math. She was punished because she could, and she did it differently. When I asked myself whether I was willing to absorb that on behalf of my kid, the answer required no deliberation whatsoever. I was not. Here is what I want you to take away from this. We talk constantly about respecting systems, following the process, working within established structures. And most of the time, those are genuinely good instincts. Systems were built by people who thought through problems, and process exists because chaos is worse. Respecting them is usually just wisdom. But systems can be wrong. Processes can fail the people they were designed to serve. And when a system becomes so committed to its own rules that it loses track of the actual outcome it was supposed to produce, when a child is marked failing because she found her own path to the right answer, someone has to say something. That is not helicopter parenting. That is not making a mountain out of a molehill. That is paying attention. My daughter still uses the traditional method. She still gets her answers right. Her teacher, to her genuine credit, has not made it an issue since. Whatever she was feeling walking out of that office, she left it there, and she has taught my daughter fairly every day since. I have a real and honest respect for that, even while I still believe she was wrong. As for my wife, she came around. About 2 weeks after the whole thing settled, we were having dinner, and she said quietly that she would have been upset too if she had seen the test, that she understood why I pushed, that it was probably the right call. I'll take that. This story, at its core, is simple. A kid did the work, got the answer right, and someone in a position of authority tried to tell her that wasn't good enough. A parent said, "Actually, it is," and the record was corrected. That is what justice looks like when it works. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever watched someone you love get penalized for doing something right, drop a like and subscribe to Cold Karma. Every single day on this channel, we cover real stories about justice, karma, and the moments when doing the right thing finally, actually, pays off. You found your people. We'll see you in the next one.